Greetings, comrades! Lieutenant Ola speaking. On the 11th of May, several brand new Soviet machines left Waldorf Tanks factory gates. The new tanks have shown their might and power, but to make their performance, you need to treat them right. The devs are ready with a special tutorial for those who wish to subdue their power.
In version 7.3, the developers have divided the tree of Soviet heavy tanks into two. The first branch, the left one, contains the highly armored tanks, whilst the second one comprises the heavy assault tanks. To balance the branches, one kind of tank has been redesigned, and some brand new tanks have been added in. USSR heavy tanks now begin with the KV-1. If we compare this to the 7.2 update, it is the simplest KV with the lower turret. The KV-1 is a different tank now, and is no longer something strange and dangerous for every single tank in the game. The KV-1 is now a normal Tier 5 heavy tank. It has some decent armor and a nice 122mm cannon, so that the player can shoot any enemy who is dealing damage to him. But the KV-1 is now the platform for every heavy tank gun, with great penetration and damage potential. After researching the KV-1, you are free to choose which branch you are most interested in. So if you want heavy assault tanks, you should research KV-1S. Or if you prefer highly armored vehicles, you should choose T-150. From these points, you can progress up the branches. There is also one additional tank that does not belong to any of the branches. You have already met this tank in some measure. It is, of course, the KV-2. This is the same KV which we are used to, but it is now equipped with the M10 cannon and a Zeiss-6, the same gun which is equipped on the KV-5. The KV-2 is a Tier 6 now, so it has been buffed with additional hit points. The turret's traverse speed and reverse speed have been buffed as well. The power of the cannon has been increased along with its accuracy. This should make fighting in the 300 to 350 meter range much easier. As this tank is a Tier 6 now, its position on the tier of battles also has changed. It is no longer as formidable as it was earlier when it occupied the position of top tank in the battle. You should also be aware that its armor value is below average for other tanks of its tier. Despite all this, the KV-2 is still one of the most unusual tanks in the game. You can research the branch of highly armored tanks after KV-1 and KV-2. At this stage, you'll meet a completely new tank, the T-150. This vehicle has more hit points than the KV-2 and is armed with the Zeiss-6, giving it high damage and penetration potential. This means it can easily go up against any enemy regardless of whether it is the top tank of the battle or not. All in all, the tank is normal for its tier. There are no unusual features as such. It is simply a good all-rounder. The next tank in the branch is the KV-3. This has been moved from Tier 6 to Tier 7, and the developers have buffed its characteristics to make it suitable for the higher tier of battles. The hit points have been increased as well as the armor, and it also has got a new gun. This tank has nearly the same amount of armor as the IS has, but it has a bigger pool of hit points. The downside of this vehicle is that it has quite bad mobility, and the aiming time of the gun is long. However, if you play this tank well and move from one good spot to another without firing on the move, these cons shouldn't present a disadvantage to you. The KV-3 is one of the most comfortable tanks for playing amongst the whole of Tier 7. Newcomers should find it easy to operate because of the high armor, whilst experienced players should find it satisfying to be able to kill 5 or 7 enemies in such battle without too much difficulty. You can research another new tank, the KV-4, after the KV-3. This one has similarities to the KV-5, but without such obvious weaknesses. This tank is particularly suited to a defensive playstyle, as it is very large and bulky and not very fast, but with good front-side armor. The gun's high accuracy makes this a good tank to fight with over long and medium distances. In fact, for Soviet tanks, the gun's accuracy is exceptional. However, fighting at close distance with enemies who are aware of this tank's weaknesses is very hard. The KV-4's armor can be easily penetrated by shooting into its lower glacis, driver's plate, or in the cupola overhead. Aiming for these weak spots is not easy, but at short range the KV-4 is certainly in a lot more danger. In addition, the side armor is quite low, so commanders need to keep the front facing towards their enemies, as compared to the impenetrable KV-5. The KV-4 is fragile on the sides. As such, tactics are important when operating this tank. You should always try to keep your distance, and if you decide to get up close, make sure you are confident that your enemies are weaker than you. You will now find that the ST-1 is in Tier 9 instead of the IS-4. This tank has similarities to the IS-4, especially in the front armor of the hull. It is almost impossible to penetrate the ST-1 from a long distance. However, the lower glacis and driver's plate are still vulnerable to guns with a high penetration potential. But this is not as big a problem as it seems. The IS-4 also had those same weaknesses, but was still recognized as a powerful vehicle. The ST-1 is similarly very good, largely because of the excellent gun it has. With an excellent penetration potential and a good DPM, it is good for aiming and shooting at enemies both from long distances and in close combat. Just be warned, this tank is quite slow. Like the KV-4, the ST-1 is not an ideal tank for moving from flank to flank. Covering of the flanks is a much better idea. Be careful, this tank has weak side armor and a giant turret, so if somebody hits you from the side, there is a good chance that the ST-1's armor will be penetrated. Meanwhile, the IS-4 is now in Tier 10, and the hit points have been increased accordingly. This gives it even more hit points than the IS-7. It also has new front armor and a new gun. This has a low aiming speed, a huge amount of accuracy, and a lovely DPM that puts it on a level with many German guns. This all makes the IS-4 a much more interesting Tier 10 tank now. In comparison with the IS-7, this tank has got pros and cons, but reaching it is now much easier because this branch contains highly armored vehicles that are easy to operate for newcomers. In the other branch, that of the heavy assault tanks, the changes are simpler. Are you ready to meet the new Tier 9 heavy tank, the IS-8? It is unusual for a heavy tank, because the gameplay and characteristics of it can be compared to those of the German medium tank, the E-50. It has high speed, low armor, but a magnificent gun. The same gun as the IS-4. Tactics are important. Do not head into a direct fight, hoping for bounces or no penetration. Instead, use your high speed to get into the best spots as quickly as possible and start picking off your enemies before they see you. If you start feeling the heat upon you, then it is time to find a new spot. Vanish before they have even realized that you have moved. This tank has got a good view range, so you do not have to depend on scouts. In addition, the accuracy while firing on the move is very good, so while you are changing your spot, you can keep picking off your enemies. This is a magnificent tank for experienced players, but may be a more difficult challenge for newcomers to master.
So, comrades, I hope that now you understand the power of Soviet guns and are ready to join the battle on your new heavy tanks. Be quick though, France is already working on their own vehicles, which means that we will meet again soon. See you on the battlefields. Пока-пока.